Sound check 1, 2, 3. Sound check 1, 2, 3.
Hello and welcome to today's meeting of the Expanding Housing and Support Services for Women, Non-Binary and Transgender Communities Subcommittee. Uh, Good afternoon. Today is November 3rd. It is 1:30 and I'd like to call our meeting to order. As we have quorum for today's meeting, please reminder to everyone that have your electronic devices switched off, and thank you guys for working on echoes and things like that. Really do appreciate it. We do have a shorter agenda today in front of us, and so I'm going to start off by asking if there's a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda that's in front of us. Thank you, Councillor Kretsch, seconded by Councillor Nan. Is there any discussion on today's agenda? Seeing none, would I just be able to get a show of hands vote to approve our agenda as presented? That carries unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Just a quick interjection from me as we get going. Are we anticipating to have any electronic votes today, or everything is going to be completely by hand? Perfect. So that's wonderful. The first item on our agenda, it was deferred from our last meeting. It is the appointment of a vice chair. So at the end of our agenda today, we're going to have a bit of a discussion about the work plan for the rest of the committee term of the year. I think we're thinking somewhere between 2 to 6 meetings in 2026 is currently what makes sense right now based on what's been discussed. Obviously, we'll have that discussion later. The role of the vice chair in advance of those meetings would be to fill in if myself as chair was ever unable to do this role of kind of facilitating the meeting. When we have agenda reviews for the chair meetings, it's a chance to maybe talk to staff before the meeting about the agenda, make sure I understand there's the reports, what's coming to the agenda, just understand what's happening on the meeting agenda a little bit more fulsomely than a committee, average committee member. And that's really the role. And so if there is anyone interested in filling that role, we can now proceed to either an appointment or an election. Is my first act here to ask if there is anyone interested. Oh, and welcome to committee members joining online. Thanks, Julie, and others for joining us. We're at the moment now, we're just doing a vice chair election. I have to look both ways in this room. Apologies. So if I'm turning my head back and forth, it's because I can only see half the meeting at a time. Is there anyone interested in doing the role of vice chair? And we're happy to have meetings with staff to support or do training for the role, anything to make sure folks feel comfortable. Seeing a hand up with Tessa interested in the role. Anyone else have any interest? I'm not seeing anyone else. Is it correct procedure to get a mover and a seconder then? I'm assuming, Tessa, you're interested in the role, you accept the nomination. I would be happy. Is there a mover for that? Councillor Maureen Wilson, Medora is happy to second. All in favor of appointing Tessa McFadden as vice chair? Show of hands, and I see everyone's hand up. Congratulations, Tessa, that was unanimous. Okay, just moving ahead here. So we've already approved our agenda. We've done our election of vice chair. Are there any declarations of interest for today's meeting? I'm not seeing anyone declaring any conflicts of interest or any in declarations of interest in the meeting. Moving right along is the approval of minutes from our previous meeting. May I please have a mover and a seconder to adopt the minutes from our previous meeting? Councillor Nan, I'm happy to second that. Is there any discussion on the minutes from our previous meeting? Seeing none, that was moved by Councillor Nan, seconded by myself. Show of hands, all in favor of just approving those minutes, and that carries unanimously. Okay, now on to the main show. I'm going to pass the mic over to some of the staff members who will be providing an update on Hamilton's housing and homelessness investments and supports for women, non-binary, and transgender residents. This is responsive to direction passed at our last meeting and is an informational report. After the staff presentation, we'll go into a bit of a Q&A on the information report before receiving the information. If there's any further direction where we want more information on something, or there's further report back in the context of the discussion, when we get to that point of the Q&A and kind of finish the Q&A up, we'll be able to move any other direction as committee members if we'd like to at that moment in time. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic over to Robin, Greg, and Michelle.
Thank you. Oh, you missed my smart introduction. That's okay. So let me just summarize where we're going to be going in the next 10 minutes. So what we've done is we've expanded gender inclusive options across shelters, drop-ins, transitional housing, and supportive housing, strengthened coordinated access and housing focused practice, updated standards and safety protocols, stabilized funding, and improved the use of data. What we still need to do is to grow permanent and supportive housing pathways, shorten the time from shelter to housing for folks, close equity gaps for trans, two-spirit, non-binary, Indigenous, and racialized residents, scale prevention and diversion up, and continue to strengthen outcome measurement and quality assurance to continue to improve practices and interventions. And we also need and want to acknowledge and support the many community partners, especially the frontline staff whose day-to-day work supports individuals and families and is critical to their path towards safe, accessible, and stable housing. It's not changing. Let's see. Oh, there we go. So known homelessness is on the rise in Canada, Ontario, and here in Hamilton. So known homelessness in Ontario has risen by an estimated 51% since 2016, with chronic homelessness tripling during that time. This is impacted by a variety of system failures, including housing affordability and the housing crisis, income support, levels of OW and ODSP for people, and healthcare access. It's also impacted by intersectionality. So a person's identity and demographic affects their experience of homelessness and their risk within homelessness, the experience of homelessness. For the provincial context, over the course of a year, about 80,000 Ontarians are experiencing homelessness. And locally, as you can see on the data dashboard on the city website, just over 2,000 people are actively experiencing known homelessness, and currently about 166 individuals that we know of experiencing unsheltered homelessness within that population. I'd also point you towards a point in time count, which is a full report and some really interesting data on the website. And so this is the recent data from the latest point in time count, November 2024, which is a snapshot of homelessness in our city by gathering essential information about an individual's housing history, their health and social needs. And just to give a few highlights from this report, to give you a bit of a picture of homelessness locally, there are a number of populations overrepresented amongst people experiencing homelessness in Hamilton. So Indigenous people, people who identify as part of a racialized group, asylum claimants and refugees. We're also seeing more people experiencing homelessness who have complex health needs, and more people living unsheltered. We've also seen a higher percentage of women surveyed over the last 2 points in time count compared to the previous initiatives. And these are statistics and trends that are reflected across the country. And we use this data, as well as ongoing program data, to develop and implement broad population approaches and interventions that meet the unique needs of marginalized groups. We do this while also collaborating and advocating to other governments to support meaningful changes in areas such as social assistance rates, affordable housing, so doing the collaborative work with the other sectors. This is also from you can also access this information at the city website. So in 2025, the city is investing $191.6 million in housing and homelessness. The city levy portion is $130.2 million, which is an increase of about $5.7 million or 3% since over 2024. This is the highest investment we've made as a community to date in housing and homelessness. And more than ever, we're relying on community partnerships to help. We know we can't do it alone, and Hamilton is collaborating with community organizations, nonprofits, and local partners to advocate for real solutions to support residents. Housing is a top priority for Hamilton, and addressing it requires a comprehensive and integrated approach, including the necessary social supports. Like many municipalities across the country, the City of Hamilton faces an acute housing crisis impacting the city's economic and social fabric, with significant gaps across this housing continuum. Just to highlight some of the capacity that's been expanded in 2025 and some of the targeted supports. There are 272 new temporary shelter spaces citywide approved by council. That includes 80 low barrier beds at the Barton Tiffany location with 24/7 mental health supports, housing navigation, and essential services. We've got enhanced beds and supports for asylum seekers to ease pressures on the wider system and has great outcomes for that population. We're expanding drop-ins and overnight options, and we've also expanded specialized care beds, including reproductive care beds. We've also got multi-year investments in accelerating affordable and supportive housing through city funding, senior level government programs, and nonprofit partnerships. This slide gets a little bit more into some of the programs under the various intervention types, but I just wanted to pause and explain the system, the overarching system a little bit in terms of like Housing Services Division is the service manager for federal and provincial funding. So we receive federal funding, we receive provincial funding, and we also allocate municipal funding towards housing and homelessness. And then the community organizations deliver those homelessness services. So some of the supports that are included under the homeless serving sector are prevention and diversion, emergency shelters, drop-ins, food security, housing-focused street outreach, Indigenous-led programs, transitional housing, intensive case management and rapid rehousing programs, residential care facility subsidies, wraparound supports at permanent supportive housing. So there's a huge number of interventions and investments under the umbrella of homeless serving sector. Also part of this picture is the violence against women sector. So those services are directly funded through the province, but the municipal funding also supports the VAW shelter overflow beds. So even though that system is managed by the province through a different process, we also support some of the gaps and pressures within that program with overflow beds. So over the past 5 years, the City of Hamilton has increased its investment in women's homelessness significantly. Since the 2019-2020 fiscal year, it has more than doubled. And currently the city is investing in women's specific homeless services, including supports for transgender, non-binary, and gender diverse individuals. Another part of the system I wanted to highlight was that the City of Hamilton dedicates 20% of their federal homeless budget to Indigenous specific homeless services. So the Indigenous community entity is a leader in their own right that receives their own federal funding, but also through our mainstream budget, we allocate 20% of our federal funding for the Indigenous community entity to inform how that's spent. So the Community Advisory Board provides funding recommendations to the General Manager of Healthy and Safe Communities for that 20%. Also wanted to point to the Housing Services report on ending chronic homelessness, which also highlights the need for additional supports for women, gender diverse individuals, including housing with supports, enhanced women emergency shelters, drop-in spaces, and transitional living enhancements. So there is quite a bit of information out there. I wanted to highlight some of the notable progress and service enhancements over the last several years. So there's been really meaningful growth and stabilization across key parts of the system. Areas in particular where investments have translated into new capacity, stronger service delivery, and system-level improvements that embed gender inclusion more consistently across programs. So one example would be the permanent housing with supports, the Dorothy Day Place, run by Good Shepherd, as a 73-bed program that opened in 2023 and provides permanent supportive housing for women, two-spirit, trans, and cis women, non-binary, and gender-diverse residents with 24/7 on-site supports. We've also invested in housing allowances, rent supplements, and supportive housing funding. These have been expanded and allocated to support housing affordability needs of equity-deserving populations. We've supported transitional housing. So in 2023, Council approved a $2.6 million in annual municipal funding to enhance staffing and services at the YWCA Transitional Living Program, which is a 65-bed program offering transitional housing for single women and non-binary individuals. As a part of this support, YWCA now offers 3 dedicated emergency reproductive care beds for people experiencing pregnancy or seeking after abortion care with wraparound supports to improve health and housing outcomes. We've also made major investments in daytime drop-ins and overnight emergency supports. So we've got Carol Ann's Place that operates an overnight drop-in for women and gender diverse individuals. We've got women emergency shelter beds, including Womankind, Mary's Place, West Avenue, which is new since the last update, Mission Services Emma's Place, which has opened operations since the last update, Willow's Place, which provides daytime drop-in services and during the winter overnight support. Cathedral Cafe and Living Rock also provide daytime drop-in services accessed by women. So together, the overnight and the daytime services create coordinated supports that aim to reduce barriers, embed trauma-informed and harm reduction practices, and strengthen pathways to housing and supports. So this picture looks at the system-wide overnight capacity. So in 2025, this is what the overnight capacity looked like. So this includes shelter beds, VAW beds, both the funded and non-funded, provincially funded, drop-in spaces, and transitional spaces, permanently funded and temporary spaces. So this is the picture of 2025 by demographic breakdown. So, and it's more than just beds, it's also pathways. So there's growth across women's and gender inclusive shelters, drop-ins and transitional housing, including improving safety, choice, and pathways to permanent housing. So it's not just beds, there's lots of case management and work happening here as well. There's system integration, coordination with shared standards, strengthening gender-informed harm reduction and housing-focused practice across the system. And the distribution of overnight beds across populations is a key indicator of system balance. While investments have grown across prevention, housing-focused supports, and system-level improvements, the ratio of spaces available to women shows how capacity pressures are experienced differently and how this has shifted over time in Hamilton. And tracking these percentages help us to show where the emergency system is addressing long-standing gaps, clarify pressures, guide governance and funding so expansions are equitable and responsive to gender-specific needs. And we continue to monitor capacity and outcomes by population, so including gender markers. So through coordinated access, HIFIS reporting, data provided by the service providers, and the information we receive from people with living experience, all this comes together to support evidence-based adjustments to programs, strengthen accountability for results, and ensure that future investments are targeted to the greatest need while advocating for safety, equity, and housing outcomes. So on the government side and the administration side of the bureaucratic process, it's in line with program support and stabilization, and we've also undergone a rigorous process to update policies and procedures at the system level, and for our funded programs to align services with gender-inclusive, trauma-informed, housing-focused practice, strengthen coordinated access and data standards, and improving safety, equity, and accountability across the system. And a lot of these policies and resources are available on the city website as well. So some of the examples of what I'm talking about here is language. So we have shifted from women only to explicitly gender inclusive language in contracts and service agreements. We've made updates and changes to policies and procedures. The emergency shelter standards were refreshed in 2023 and housing-focused case management policy. These updated policies outline expectations around operations, considering a trauma-informed gender equity lens, recognizing the systemic barriers faced by women, trans, gender-inclusive, or non-binary people experiencing intersecting oppressions. Some other examples are affirming gender identity at intake, enhanced confidentiality protections, reproductive care and health supports. And all of these matter because the updates respond to the heightened risks that this population is exposed to for gender-based discrimination and violence, as well as needs linked to caregiving and pregnancy by embodying safety, dignity, and equitable access across the emergency response system. And this is taken from the Housing Secretariat strategic plan, also available on the website. Lots of website plugs here. Maybe I'll open it up to Gloria to speak to these. But basically, over the next 3 years, the City of Hamilton is investing to create about 1,200 new affordable and supportive housing units, helping people across the city access safe and stable homes.
Thank you very much, Robin. Can anyone hear me?
We can hear you. Yep.
Yes, okay, thank you very much. I am Gloria Rojas, Acting Manager of Housing Policy and Relations here in the Housing Secretariat. One of the mandates of the Housing Secretariat is the implementation of the Housing Sustainability and Investment Roadmap. Through the roadmap, we are focusing on providing housing across the housing continuum. So the roadmap doesn't specifically reference women or transgender individuals within its framework, but it's structured around 4 pillars designed to strengthen the whole system. The 4 pillars are increasing the supply of affordable housing, enhancing housing stability, addressing homelessness, and expanding housing with supports. So the idea with the roadmap is to provide a broad framework to meet diverse housing needs in Hamilton, including supportive housing for vulnerable populations. The Housing Secretariat has advanced the 4 pillars through the Affordable Housing Development Project stream. And through the stream, we are providing funding support to Oakwood Place, which is a project that will deliver 90 supportive housing units for women, gender diverse people, and their children. However, the city's commitment to affordable and supportive housing is much larger than that, and has prepared a plan from 2024 to 2026 to fund 30 housing projects representing a total investment of $58.4 million that will result in approximately 1,444 affordable housing units, 511 supportive units, and 138 attainable homes. In total, this represents over 2,100 units across the housing continuum, which demonstrates council commitment to our residents that Hamilton is making tangible, immediate investments to increase affordable housing. The city has also prepared 4 municipal land parcels to be used for affordable housing, which will add many more units to the city in the near future. Thank you very much for allowing me to be part of this presentation to this very important group, and I'll pass it back to Robin. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Just in quick summary, hoping to give you a very whirlwind tour of the enhancements that the city has committed to in partnership with the federal and provincial funding, and in large part able to achieve those outcomes through cooperation of our of the community service providers, as well as the very hard work of people with lived experience. Yeah, we're continually challenged by the need, the growing need. We're continually challenged by intersecting and multiple sectors and the collaboration and communication there. And yeah, open to questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robin, for that overview. And I think to committee members as well for, I think it was Councillor Nan who moved that motion at the last meeting to basically say, hey, it's been 3 years since this committee's met. A lot's been happening at the city. Can you let us know, what's the current state of things and what's been going on in the past couple of years and how are things changing? Given there has been a pause in this committee's workflow, kind of digesting this report, the discussion of it is meant to inform our work plan for the coming year. So if there's questions folks have about the specific presentation or how that presentation kind of relates to the broader work on the file, happy to kind of go to those now. We have folks from the Housing Services Division in the room here to answer some questions. And if some future committee work comes out of that conversation, we're happy to make sure that gets happening in a motion. But right now, so everyone's on the same page, we're going to go to a bit of a Q&A on the presentation we just heard. If folks have questions about what they heard or what that means or what other work might be going on, now's the time to ask those questions. And I'm going to work with Jessica to develop a bit of a speakers list here. So if anyone does, I see Julie has their hand up. Julie, happy to start with yourself.
Okay, thanks so much. I'm not sure if this is the appropriate place to ask, but I know the city kind of has been in conversation with HATS the tiny micro shelters. So I didn't know if there was an update about that. And I was also following in the news, you're probably aware about Calgary that's using like modular units for housing. So I didn't know if that was on the horizon for the city of Hamilton, if you're aware of those efforts, or yeah, any information you could provide about either of those things. I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. It's Michelle Baer, Director of Housing Services. So through the chair, on your specific question with respect to HATS, so we continue to work with the HATS team, the organizing team, with respect to an appropriate or possible site to put the HATS project in Hamilton. So that work is still underway. No final decisions made. We expect to bring a report to General Issues Committee in December specific to HATS, Julie. So hopefully that helps on that piece. With respect to modular build, we do have some modular build within Hamilton, and I know that the Housing Secretariat continues to work and support not-for-profit and other builders, and some of that is modular build. I don't know, Gloria, if you want to speak to that, or is that sufficient?
I think that's sufficient, Michelle. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any follow-up, Julia?
Yeah, I wondered what I don't know if you could give me like kind of 1 or 2 points about what the main issues or delays are with getting the HATS site running. Is it just like site selection, or what the issues are?
Yes, so on the HATS file in particular, the issue has been finding a location to put the HATS units, cabins, whatever we might call them. So the whole HATS project, where we can locate them. The ask is to locate them on a piece of city property, and so it's identifying a place that's appropriate. When we went through the construction of the outdoor shelter, the Tiffany Barton shelter, we certainly had a lot of learnings through that with respect to what we need to do when we're citing operations for something, when we consider the needs of the clients that will be sheltered at that location. What does that look like? So really right now, the holdup is looking for a site, identifying an appropriate site.
Any other follow-up, Julie?
No, thank you so much.
Thank you. I saw in the room, I think I saw Medora, Councillor Maureen Wilson, and then online I saw Councillor Kretsch. Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you, Robin, for the presentation. That was informative. I have a question about the breakdown between the number of spaces. So you had 38% are women's spaces and 39%, I think, are men. But in that 38%, that includes the VAW, Violence Against Women, shelter spaces. And so just want to add some point of clarification here on the VAW spaces, because it's not quite apples to apples when you compare men and women's spaces and you include the VAW spaces, and that's because there are children in the VAW shelters, but the men's shelters don't have children. So on adult to adult level, comparing women and men, if we took out the number of beds, and I understand the challenges of accounting for the number of beds that are actually serving children, because it varies depending on size of families. But it looks like a equal breakdown, but actually if we split out the adults, it wouldn't be an equal breakdown. I just want to clarify that with you.
Just in response, we also, within the homeless sector, we removed the rooms for families. So that does offset it for an approximate number of beds. So like if you looked at women within the family sector and within families and couples, I feel like it's a very similar number. Yeah.
Thanks, Robin. So I'm just going to add to that a bit. You're absolutely right, Medora, that it is a different number and we're not talking about apples to apples without doubt. So I can go through where the beds overall right now are in the city. That'll probably help a bit. So we have adult mixed beds. So we have Tiffany Barton that has couples in shelter. We also have some of the funded Wesley ASAP beds that will accept families as well, and couples could be part of that. We have approximately 325 men's beds, so adult men, so they would be singles. For adult women singles, we have 101 funded beds. For families in the family center, we have 80 beds, and then we have hotel overflow for families as well. Approximately 96 beds, but the issue with the hotel rooms, of course, is depending on the family makeup, how many beds can be used at any one time. And then we have 21 beds across the city that are for youth, so they could be male or female.
So that's a helpful breakdown, yeah, and that's what I understood it to be, is the adult-to-adult split there, the singles, or the singles, we should call them adult male singles, adult female singles. And now I lost my other question, because so many thoughts just went through my head all at once. So in that breakdown between the single beds, or the family beds, you could talk about the percentage of women-led families. And then also gender diverse-led families would also be another context to think about. Do you have that information?
Yes, but not today. We can get that information for sure.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. And it's helpful to understand that when we're talking about unhoused populations and homeless populations, that we're actually, when we talk about families, predominantly, historically, it's been about 80% would be single women-led families. And so just to understand the gender nature of homelessness for families when they're being described would be helpful. The other piece I wanted to clarify was the Housing Secretariat. I appreciate the mention of Oakwood, which is a YWCA project, an initiative. But what I see consistently with the Housing Secretariat, there hasn't been a specific gender analysis in the approach, or a gender targeting approach to the housing units. And it would be helpful to have some more insight into what units are specifically designed dedicated for women and LGBTQ community in terms of the housing supports. If there aren't targets, just how many have been allocated and approved, funded under the Housing Secretariat, because I think that gives richer depth, especially as the city's trying to grow and develop permanent housing, is to understand where it is specifically for women, LGBTQ people, and then what supports get tied into that housing, because we know that gendered specific housing also requires often supports with it when we're talking about the precariously housed and unhoused, and the reality that violence, gender-based violence, is actually the largest cause of homelessness in Canada.
Gloria, if you want to jump in, you certainly can. Sorry. Yes, so on both parts, Medora, I wonder if we bring a report back. It would make good sense to bring back a bit of a report on basically the story of homelessness and what the demographics are behind those numbers, because you're right. And the other piece that's important to remember is that these are the number of shelter beds we have. These are the individuals experiencing homelessness, but those that are consenting to using HIFAS, there is still some hidden homelessness behind this that's not shared through the story. So I think that makes sense. And then, Gloria, I think we would bring back within that report overall, perhaps the data with respect to where the investments have been using a gendered lens and what the plan forward would look like.
Yes, that sounds like a great idea, Michelle. Thank you.
Thanks. Medora, do you have a final follow-up on that one? Okay, no worries. I have Councillor Maureen Wilson, followed by Councillor Cameron Crutch for questions on the presentation, and I'll add myself to the list when we're all finished on first-time speakers. Councillor Maureen Wilson.
Thank you. Thank you, Senior Project Manager Perry, for that. If I could lift off where Medora left off, just so I understand in terms of expectations. For the work of the Housing Secretariat, please remind me bad, does the investment plan make specific reference as a target a gender-informed housing? Through the chair.
Gloria, I would ask that you speak specifically to this question.
Yes, through the chair. The 3-year investment plan doesn't have a specific target for housing units for women or diverse population. At the moment, the Oakwood Place is the only project that that we know that is specifically dedicated to women and women diverse people.
Okay, thank you. So thank you very much for that. So then if I could go back to Director Baird's point, in order for us perhaps to action that, we would need, is your suggestion on the first action, a story of homelessness and the demographics. We need a further refinement of that if we wanted to pursue an action of that. If the thesis is that the predominant persons who are being either displaced, prolonged, subject to multiple matters which increase the hurdle are gender specific, then any plan that doesn't recognize gender specific, it may be a loss to our community. I just want to make sure I'm fully understanding the commitment of reports moving forward. Thank you.
So, yes, so I think the first step would be come back, and we already have that story with respect to who's experiencing homelessness, what those demographics look like, duration, those kinds of pieces of the story. As I sit here, I think too, the other piece to that is what are the demographics with respect to our access to housing waitlists, so we can see the number of women, non-binary individuals, their family, household leads that are looking for housing, because I think that's where we understand the need. The other piece, I would say, the importance of this when we think about it and the impacts on families and women is the intergenerational impact of family and women, particularly female-led households, homelessness. So I think that that's the first step, to bring back what those numbers look like, what the picture in the community is, and really to put a story behind numbers, if you will. I guess I would say that. And then the next piece would then be, and then how do we prioritize solutions to address that?
Okay, thank you. I understand that now. If I have time for just a few more questions. If I could just jump before I forget, and I've been meaning to ask this question for a while, the dashboard numbers. During the, what's the word I'm looking for? During the time of Justice Ramsey, and he was asking a number of the parties that both sides were exploring during that exercise, if the city's numbers included, I think he used the term perhaps private shelter opportunities, whether it be places of worship or otherwise. And I don't think it did. I'm not sure if it did. I'd just like confirmation. And do we have a sense of that size at all? If we don't enumerate that, where might we, how might we? Through the chair.
Yeah, so through the chair, the number of shelter beds on the city's dashboard, as well as the number of individuals experiencing homelessness, when we use that number, it's coming through HIFIS, does not include any individuals who might be in a these are funded, city-funded beds. And we don't have a sense what other beds are out there and what the scope of those numbers would be.
And if I may, has there been an effort to try and identify those, or is it just not within our mandate to do so through the chair?
The point in time count is an attempt to get at those numbers. Okay. And so those surveys go out to violence against women shelters. They go to some of our known and non-funded shelters. And there's also a component of a street survey. So that's attempting to get at that number, but that wouldn't be included in the data dashboard. That you would look to the point in time count report and information on that one.
Thank you. I think I have maybe time for one more question. I am very interested in the data which tells us the reasons for housing loss. And I think there's a stereotype out there that every single person who is deprived of housing is there as a consequence of a health issue. And I'm interested in the narrative which says 31% are there as a consequence of financial issue, which means, I'm asking for confirmation on two things, which means that it's kind of coupled with the next number on your presentation, that they may be there as a consequence of, they had private shelter in the private marketplace. The rent didn't match their income. And as a consequence, 31% have found themselves suddenly unhoused. Am I reading that correctly through the chair?
Yes, so through the chair, this comes through a point in time count information as well. And the majority, so that number that's in the presentation is coming through point in time. And those individuals truly are unhoused as a result of income. And usually that's where we see the OW, ODSP rates are simply not keeping pace with the cost of living in Hamilton and beyond. It's not a Hamilton alone problem. It extends certainly beyond Hamilton, beyond the province. And I know that we hear anecdotally that people find themselves homeless as a result of mental health issues, but that isn't solely the reason. And in fact, in most cases, income, economics is the driver behind why people are finding themselves homeless.
And then, thank you. For that, I just need a little bit of, I'm not a data geek. I wish I was. Just understanding the gender profile of the economic precarity number. Do we know, because I'm thinking about solutions, right? Policy solutions. If we know there's a substantive number are there as a consequence of income precarity, what number of those persons are non-male? Thank you. Those are my questions.
That's a very good question. I don't have the answer off. Robin, do you know it? Go ahead.
Complicated.
Go ahead.
Okay, we'll go slow.
Yeah, it's very complicated, and research seems to show that even when the primary presenting issue for homelessness is gender-based violence, that economics is a huge factor in that. The second question is, well, then why didn't you just move and get your own place? Because of economics. So that's why they find themselves in homelessness. So it's prevalent across all genders, but is more severe when people are trans, non-binary individuals. It's more severe when they have other intersecting oppressions like racialized identity, Indigenous. So actually men and women in homelessness, the most recent research seems to suggest that men and women have very similar experience of challenges economically, but that it intensifies based on those other intersecting oppressions.
Thank you, Councillor Maureen Wilson.
I'm just going to add to that.
Yeah, please go
quickly
ahead.
too, Councillor. Apologies. And Councillor Wilson, we can bring some of that back in the demographics too, looking at our specific point in time count. And for that approximately 30%, 31%, what percentage of those would fit that gender categorization? That'll help us.
Thank you. Just as an aside, I think there's a lot of goodwill, and I've heard a lot of goodwill from my colleagues on a responsive mechanism to harm when women are harmed. I just think it would be advantageous collectively if we were to move that slightly in not a responsive, but obviously a preventative mode of our investments are not, and that women actually get to define what the problem is. As opposed to men defining it in terms of, domestic violence, shelters, et cetera. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Maureen Wilson. I have on our speakers list right now, Councillor Cameron Kretsch, followed by Jasmine Whiteside on our speakers list. Councillor Kretsch.
Thanks. My question is specifically about market forces and their bearing on the delivery of housing that impacts the groups outlined by Robin. So two ways I think about this are, one, they're really heavy and private market forces make it difficult for us to get housing built in other sectors. Number two, we're seeing a real crash in some terms of market housing, in terms of properties that might otherwise have been used for private market condominiums, maybe now have the opportunity to be acquired through the Housing Secretariat and can come online to be used for housing. And we could do what I think people here are suggesting is prioritizing the housing for specific individuals. And so I just wanted some information from staff about where you see us at the moment, right? So do you see market housing being
Perfect. Thank you, committee members. We are live again. On our speakers list was Councillor Cameron Kretsch. We were talking about questions from the presentation we had received. On deck was committee member Jasmine Whiteside. Councillor Kretsch, back to you.
Yeah, I'm going to ask the question a bit differently maybe and try to see if it makes a bit more sense. What I'm really trying to understand here is simply the private housing market's influence on the kind of housing we're trying to achieve this subcommittee. So what I want to understand is if staff feel like this time is beneficial for us trying to focus on housing that would be non-market housing or market housing that would fit the target groups that we're trying to meet? Is this a good time to do that? Not a good time to do that? I'm just trying to understand your perspective on this because right now we're obviously going through a situation where there's huge fluctuations in how development and building is happening. And so does that provide an opportunity or not?
Through the chair, Gloria Rojas from the Housing Secretariat. Councillor, as I mentioned previously, the roadmap doesn't specifically target different groups of populations. However, we understand that there is a need to preserve rental units that are at risk of being sold in the private market. And we know that if this happens, the affordability of those rental units will be lost. So last year in the roadmap annual report, staff presented a draft acquisition plan for affordable units. And then during 2026, we have work on the details of that plan. And on on December 3rd, we will present a report to council presenting an affordable housing acquisition plan. The idea of this plan is to support nonprofit organizations to acquire these type of properties that are at risk of being sold. And the idea is to provide capital funding. And we are preparing a 2-year pilot plan with the intent to support the acquisition of 100 units. I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Thanks. So I understand the plans of the Housing Secretariat, the goals that we have, and I really appreciate you outlining them a little more clearly. Do you think we're going to have more success in achieving some of those acquisition strategies given the downturn in the market, or less success? I guess I'm just trying to understand where you think we are in the current situation that's facing housing in general right now in Ontario, and if you think that this is going to be a beneficial time for us or not so much.
What we have seen is that there are several of these properties coming to market. So it seems like it's a good opportunity for nonprofit organizations to take advantage of those opportunities at this time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your answer.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councillor Kretsch. Jasmine Whiteside.
Hi, yeah, so I wanted to ask, I noticed in the presentation that it was mentioned that there's like a growing need to tackle homelessness. I wanted to know, like, are there any metrics of like the amount of beds being added versus the demand or need for beds by like the LGBTQ community and trans and non-binary women as well? I just wanted to know basically like, are the amount of beds that are being added, are they addressing that need? Or are they not competing with it?
So there has been a definite increase in people identifying or willing to identify to us their specific gender identity. And so that's why there has been a corresponding shift in policy contracts, all the administrative stuff I mentioned throughout the presentation, but it's very difficult to get a full understanding of the community's needs. Like it differs by age, by population, by all the intersecting identities. But yes, we've absolutely, through the point in time count and through HIFIS, have noticed, and this is across the country, an increase of people being willing to share their gender identity markers. And so we've seen an increase in those categories.
Any follow-up, Jasmine?
Yeah, so then in the future, would there be like any push to measure basically what that rising need is, so that way we could see directly, I guess, the impacts of these measures, like if more gender diverse people are reaching out, or if more gender diverse people are, less, or if those needs seem to be getting more sated. I guess just a way of like specifically seeing that within the Hamilton area.
I think it happens at a couple of levels, and there's definitely room for improvement on this. So at the service provider level, people are able to comment anonymously on their service provision. So we are able to look at data by gender identity and client satisfaction surveys, that sort of thing. There's also a growing movement to get qualitative data from people with lived experience, and it happens on project specific, but I do think that we've got the opportunity to look at more systemic, system-wide interventions, and this is happening across Canada. There's actually very few to us LGBTQIA specific shelters in Canada, but there is definitely a growing need and a growing call for developing programs specific to the population.
Any other follow-up, Jasmine?
No, that's all. Thanks.
Thanks so much. I see Tessa.
Thank you, Robin, for your report, and Jasmine for your question. I think it makes me reflect on the right-sizing the shelter work that was occurring a couple years ago, and some of the conversations we've had at the WIPIC table in terms of reigniting that work. And I guess my question is there a plan, a concrete plan to look at those numbers, right-sizing the shelter, and also be inclusive of gender diverse and trans individuals, looking at that population in particular, but also not revisiting the past numbers, but looking at the current landscape of homelessness in our community, and perhaps doing a little bit more research and gathering those numbers, and then looking at the shelter system and adjusting where necessary. So is there any upcoming plan for that?
Thanks, Tessa, through the chair. So overall, you'll know that in 2024, we temporarily expanded the shelter system. So we do have more beds across the entire system. However, it was done within existing providers. So not necessarily does it address the need when we think about the women, gender diverse individuals. It was a more generic, quick expansion of the system. We do need to right-size the system by making sure the right beds are in the right location, serving the correct population. We also want to ensure that our shelters are provided in a way that meets the needs of the individuals that are there. We not only had we not expanded our shelter system for some time, we also hadn't changed really the operation of shelters and whose needs were being met, what the physical plant, if you will, looks like. And so there's planning underway on that front. However, we don't necessarily want to invest in more shelter beds. We know that shelters are not a permanent housing solution, and they're not necessarily a solution to homelessness. So we don't want to invest in further beds versus to make sure the numbers of beds we have are allocated in the correct way across the system. And instead look at how do we use the funding to support more permanent solutions, more opportunity for transitional living, if that's the intermediary step, supportive housing overall. So I don't think that you're going to see us come back and ask for more shelter beds, as opposed to how do we use the funding in the best way possible to meet the populations that need to be met, and what do those solutions look like. Tied to that as well is the need to Barton Tiffany in particular is temporary in nature, and although it doesn't necessarily have a closure date as of yet, we've said from the beginning that it would only be approximately 2 years in duration, and we know that it's been at capacity since it's opened, and it's met a need in our community to provide a location that would accept couples. And so we need to allocate those beds within our system in some way in order that we can still meet the needs of that population, because we know there's a need there. So I think it's more about right-sizing our system, meaning taking all of the beds we have and figuring out where are they best fitted, as opposed to investing further in further beds.
Greg Tedesco, Manager of Homelessness Policy and Programs and Housing Services. The only thing I'll add is that, we've been focusing a lot on kind of those overnight spaces and those beds, but we're also taking into account beyond the bricks and mortar, those support pieces. So just wanted to also mention, we've had that conversation around rapid rehousing and intensive case management programs as well. And so just wanted to kind of paint that larger picture as well, is that these conversations occur within those support services as well, beyond the emergency, also on the prevention side with the shelter diversion programs as well. So just to note that as we're talking about, we saw the housing spectrum kind of graphic that went up there, but there's those key support pieces that go there, and then also ensuring that there are targeted supports to different populations within there. And that's also something that we're continuing to look at, supporting that conversation in the community around what that looks like and where that areas of most need are there as well. So thank you. Tessa, did you have any follow-up? Perfect. Would I just be, sorry. Yeah, Medora, go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to follow up on that piece. I think it makes there's sense to me in looking at the support services side for the LGBTQ plus IA plus population, because there are, unless you can tell me otherwise, there are no specialized housing supports for the LGBTQIA plus population in this community right now. And that when we look at percentages and we ask for gender breakdowns, we're always going to have a low number on that population, a lower number. It's always going to be underrepresented. And it won't create the rationale justification for specialized shelter or housing if we look at it from percentage, but the types of supports that are needed and the specialization. So I'm wondering what work is being done to understand those needs, and then to look to an allocation of support services in terms of what Michelle talked about, not necessarily a shelter focus, although there could be a component of that, but transitional housing or supportive housing or other types of housing that could really support that population that is being underserved right now. Although I will add, include gender inclusive, and you included that in contracts, and we all have to have gender inclusive spaces. And so we do that, but we're not doing it with a specialization in the supports that are needed by the population.
Yeah, through the chair, I think this is one thing that we have tried to evolve over a number of years, especially when we're discussing this issue with the federal government. So, and mostly in the scope of the point in time count. And this is where some of the kind of official, I'll say, data has come from in terms of gender diversity and identification there. And our question back with our federal partners has always been, so we're collecting this information. I think the first time we collected more detailed breakdowns of gender identity and sexual orientation was in 2018. And we went back and had that conversation of what next, right? So we're collecting this information. So what kind of service level impacts does this have in our community? I think this is something that, we in Hamilton now, kind of as we've expanded the amount of data and information we're collecting on a day-to-day basis, we're kind of looking at exactly what you're saying around the kind of now what part of it, right? We have this information, we know who is experiencing homelessness, what those risk factors are in the community, and how do we kind of tailor support specifically rather than having a kind of catch-all and then saying, well, kind of we've had these populations access these services just by default. And so I think I'll say, in summary, I think we're continuing to look at that. We're continuing to have those conversations, I think, especially with other communities as well, because other communities are showing that overrepresentation, especially when we're looking at youth homelessness, I think is one of those big areas that we're seeing more prevalence of gender diversity and members of 2S LGBTQ plus communities represented. And I think these are those discussions that we're having as well to learn from other communities in terms of their approach and their response as well there too. So I'll say, I think this is part of that ongoing conversation, but definitely that the data piece is only a portion of that. It's the what next is kind of where we're at in terms of having that conversation. And I think part of that would be, and as Robin mentioned, engagement with local tables, people with lived expertise, kind of going back and continuing to engage in that conversation around what those specific supports could be and maybe should be. Any follow-up, Medora? Not seeing anyone else on the speakers list at this time. If I could pass the chair to Tessa as vice chair, and if that's okay with you, I just have a couple questions. Perfect. So through you, Chair, some of the things I've heard from community members today are in general just trying to seek a better understanding of how we're using data and how data is collected. I've also heard specific questions about how when we get information, for example, so borrowing from Councillor Maureen Wilson's example that shows we're not just looking at a gender breakdown by experience of homelessness, but we're also looking at causes of homelessness on top of that. And we're seeing, for example, I'll pick a different example than employment, but we're seeing maybe experiences of experiencing incarceration, maybe there's racial cultural information, and then we're also seeing gender identity. Are we seeing a convergence of those things? How are we seeing those intersection of identities kind of play out in the data, or is on the cause side? So what's actually causing folks of this identity experience to have this experience as well? And so getting some more information there along the lines Councillor Maureen Wilson was saying. Heard from Medora a lot of the information about getting a better understanding of breaking down gender, understanding within not just kind of funding envelopes, but within program levels. And so doing kind of more of an apples to apples comparison, hearing a need for some of those numbers that were shared in the present overview, but not necessarily in the presentation, just bringing those back in a written report in a previous meeting. And so I'm wondering, with the help of the clerk, to maybe if I could just put up some questions or draft direction that I'd be seeking a seconder for, with the intention of having a report back on some of these conversations, or just taking this kind of conversation we've had and having a bit more of an intentional conversation, picking this up as a next step with this committee. And so I've sent some questions throughout the meeting based on what I've been hearing from all of you to the clerks, just to put up at this moment. Yeah.
Sorry, through the chair to the councillor, I put something together if you want to have a look.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jessica. So asking that housing services staff report back in the first quarter, so January, February, March of next year, providing an overview of how the city's using gender-based data within the housing and homelessness division, understanding how the current framework's being used, how is it being used not just to collection, but also to analysis, interpretation, and application of data, understanding, that piece about intersectional experiences and how those are coming in and being considered, identifying gaps. And I think this is the point that Jasmine talked about, working to mitigate these gaps if they exist, and understanding a breakdown of funding, which is the piece that Medora was talking to. So it's a bit of a laundry list of a motion. In terms of the clauses there, but I think those are some of the things that heard from folks today. Happy to entertain any discussion and maybe look to Medora as a seconder for that, if that's okay. Perfect. So that's moved, seconded by Medora, and Tessa, I'll throw it to you to kind of see if there's any speakers and kind of monitor the discussion for that. And Jessica can let you know if there's anyone trying to get on the speakers list.
Is there any follow-up? Councillor Wilson?
Thank you. I appreciate Jessica's or Elsie Versace's work on this. My apologies if I could just see the language on the screen again. And just the way my brain works, is it possible to break it up into letters so we can see the component parts? That housing services staff be requested to provide or maybe leave that out in terms of we could hook the deadline at the end. Just what the specific asks are, because my what I'm looking for, Elsie Versace, is not only how and what we're collecting in terms of demographic information, it's how we're using that, if any, in informing our housing sustainability and investment roadmap that is gender specific. And if I could just have that intentional direction. I know it's in there, but it's just the way my brain works. So I guess the first ask is, what and how are we, in terms of our methodology on gender, what are we collecting and how are we collecting and who's it collecting? And then the second part, of course, is the applicability of that in informing our strategic plans, if any. Thank you.
Thank you. Did anybody else have any additional questions or follow-up? Medora?
Just
Thank you, Medora.
Apologies, Tess, because we know we didn't get to do a training or anything like that on how this works. You just got thrown into the fire. But again, if no one else has their hands up, what I would do as chair is I'd say, okay, we've heard conversation, let's go to a vote on that. But maybe seeking, I don't know if anyone online has their hand up, and apologies for jumping in there, but just want to make sure we're all on the same page.
Seeing no further questions, can we go to vote? Show of hands, all in favor? Okay. Carried.
Thank you so much, Tessa. It looked like that carried. I'm going to go back to the main item right now. I forget if we got a mover and a seconder to put the report on the floor at the beginning. So why don't we get a fresh one now? Tessa, as a mover, and anyone who would like to second receiving this information. Julie, would you like to do that? Yeah. Okay. Moved by Tessa, seconded by Julie, that the presentation be received. We've already gone through the conversation, but if there's any last conversation on this, not seeing any, a show of hands vote. And that carries. And then just as we're wrapping up our agenda today, and we're thinking about this committee a little bit overall, we are going to have a meeting now in Q1 of 2026 to hear back from staff on the motion that was just moved, as well as to hear a little bit about annual status report that'll be in the works with the housing division anyway at that time. So some of the information may be able to be brought out to this committee as part of preparing for that annual report to council. We also have decided that we want to review our terms of reference and make recommendations for how this committee should continue to function in the next term of council, given there's been a bit of a pause. We want to get some work done as a committee and then make some edits to our terms of reference to set it up for success in the future. If there's any kind of third priority we want to get done in the next 8 to 12 months as a committee, happy to grab some quick hands now if people have the thoughts, but really this is an invitation to send myself as your chair, Tessa as your vice chair, Jessica as our staff liaison, just a bit of a heads up saying, hey, this is something I think I'd really like to get done in this committee, or this is something I'd like to understand a little bit more about, because that'll help us set a meeting calendar for the rest of the year and understand the meeting frequency. Right now, I'm assuming we might want a meeting or two about this data topic in the new year, and we'll probably want a meeting dedicated to our terms of reference. So right now we're looking at 3 to 4 committee meetings in the 2026, kind of front loaded in 2026. If there's other work that we want to get done as a committee or other topics that come up, just please let chairs or the legislative coordinator know, and we can make sure those meetings get scheduled so we have the time to do the work. But unless anyone has a discussion on that right now, it's an open invitation to be part of that kind of agenda setting dialogue. And I'll just pause for a moment to see if anyone's hand flashes up. And not seeing any, I'd like to thank everyone and say this meeting is adjourned. Thank everyone for, oh, sorry, apologies. If anyone had a notice of motion, I have to just check to see. Not seeing any, we can call this meeting adjourned at 2:49 on November 3rd.